Welcome into The Pulse, Detroit's only nightly political talk show. I'm Ruparaj. We have a jam-packed 30 minutes for you. You know, Jay Leno says late-night comedy shows need to steer away from jokes that divide us. Popular comedian Will Burkart is in Detroit, and he's here in Studio C to unpack that with us. Also, we're talking about the future of the Democratic and Republican parties with supporters from each. Who are the next big names that will be frontrunners for both parties? And two wars overseas in Ukraine and Gaza. A political science professor with what it will take to see progress in both. But first, we're talking tariffs. And despite claims as late as Thursday afternoon they would kick in today, President Trump has rolled back the implementation of most of them until August 7th. There are some exceptions. In fact, Mexico has another 90-day delay, and Canada's hike went into effect today, going from 25% to 35% on products not covered by that trade deal from President Trump's first term. Administration officials point out they've already made multiple agreements with many countries out there, including South Korea, Vietnam, and even the European nation, which represents 27 nations. That extension comes amid a dismal jobs report. This is big news. It shows American companies only added about 73,000 jobs in July, far fewer than the 100,000 that was expected. And unemployment ticked up slightly to 4.2%. Those numbers are so disappointing, President Trump has called for the firing of the head of the Bureau of Labor Statistics, claiming the numbers are rigged. The monthly employment report is one of the most closely watched pieces of government economic data and can cause sharp swings in financial markets. The figures sent U.S. markets down about 1.5% on Friday. And speaking of money and finances, the Corporation of Public Broadcasting has announced it is shutting down after Congress pulled more than $1 billion in funding last month. The corporation made the announcement today, acknowledging those who called and petitioned Congress on its behalf. The CPB provides federal funding to local public radio and television stations across America, including NPR and PBS. The CPB has informed employees that a majority of staff positions will be axed by the end of September. The nonprofit was created back in 1967 to help support public broadcasting. More on this in the days to come. Moving on now to the conflict in Ukraine. President Trump says he's ordered 2 nuclear subs to be, quote, positioned in the appropriate regions following statements by the former Russian president. He called the president's new deadline for Russia to end its conflict in Ukraine an additional step towards war, the former president of Russia says. President Trump, meantime, has said if Russia doesn't end this violence soon, he'll be signing off on severe tariffs against that country. Turning now to the situation in Gaza, where more starvation deaths have been reported overnight. And in the meantime, this new video from a United Nations humanitarian aid actually shows shots being fired near where crowds have been gathering for food donations and rations. This footage was taken Wednesday. UN officials say they were warning shots by Israeli forces. The Israeli army says the incident is under review, but disputes any claim the IDF purposely fired at civilians. All of this coming as U.S. Middle East envoy Steve Witkoff and U.S. ambassador to Israel Mike Huckabee visited a food distribution site in Gaza today. They were there to kind of figure out and assess the situation and help the Trump administration come up with a plan for food deliveries. European nations like France and Spain are now joining a massive airdrop effort started by some of Gaza's neighbors. But the United Nations and other humanitarian groups say only a ceasefire can provide the access needed to feed the entire region. According to Gaza's health ministry, since the start of the war in Gaza, more than 62,000 people have been killed, the overwhelming majority of them Palestinians. That number going up with the humanitarian crisis, which is getting a lot of talk right now at the international and local level. Joining us now to talk about what this all means, both what's happening in Ukraine, also what's happening in Russia. We're talking to Dr. Peter Trumbore, political science chair at Oakland University. And Dr. Trumbore, it's always good to see you. Even under these circumstances of seeing our world in so many corners kind of fall apart for so many people who live in those regions. Yeah. And Dr. Trumbore, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
So let's talk about this Gaza issue first. I think it's important to note that this conversation often ends in the way it began, which is how did we get here? But this is a very different situation. This is a humanitarian crisis. Talk about the difference there.
So we got to this point because Hamas attacked Israel in a very horrific terrorist incident almost, 2 years ago now. And since then, it has been an absolute humanitarian catastrophe, primarily for Palestinian civilians. As your report, showed, 62,000 Palestinians have been killed. The vast majority of them are civilians. And there is some sense that what the Israeli government is engaging in is a form of collective punishment, targeting all Palestinians in Gaza as a consequence of what Hamas did. And so I think that's how we've gotten to this point, between blockades of humanitarian aid, the United Nations essentially being forced to stop delivering aid. The aid that is coming in is by a separate private organization that's sponsored by the United States and the government of Israel that has been incredibly ineffective at delivering aid. We've seen attacks on civilians trying to get food relief at these feeding stations, many of those attacks coming from Israeli security forces. And so that's why we're here.
And we're here now to watch the world talk about this and hopefully do something about it. But right now, in terms of those conversations, it's interesting to see the break that we've seen. For a while, we were looking at President Trump and Israel kind of joined forces and were talking with the same talking points. But President Donald Trump recently said, as of 3 days ago, look, this is starvation. Right. I saw the pictures. How important is it for our president to say that?
I think it's very important. I don't think that's going to sway Benjamin Netanyahu in the least bit, in part because he needs the support of the far right-wing political parties in the Knesset that keep him in power. He has to basically cater to their desires, and their desires, frankly, are to eliminate the Palestinians. There's a strong push in the Israeli far right to annex all of the occupied territories, not just Gaza, but also the West Bank, and to expel the Palestinians. And this is something that that we have not, but the United States has not really been willing to talk about. We come back to this question of, Donald Trump seemed to be changing his tune. I think Donald Trump only believes things when he sees it on television. And so when he saw these pictures that have been everywhere across TV, even on Fox News, not to take a shot at your corporate sponsors, but, that's what has sort of energized him at this point, not necessarily any other information.
Yeah, this is Fox television stations, one of almost 30 stations operated locally. But yes, Fox News has reported that. I want to point something out, though, that I think is really important when you talk about this, because, there are so many truths that can all be there at the same time. The other truth here is that these hostages, these poor people, are literally still being held. And if you look at that humanitarian issue, which is not as large of a crisis, obviously, as the tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of people, it still is something that needs to be resolved.
Well, right. There's still, I think, there's some belief that there are about 20 hostages still being held. And I think the belief is that those 20 are still alive. And you're right. But they can't be free. They won't be freed until there's a ceasefire. And the Israeli government has been unwilling to seriously engage with Hamas on the question of ceasefire. And so until those two sides are able to sit down and agree to stop killing each other, I think this humanitarian catastrophe is going to continue to unfold.
I want to talk about Russia in the 2 minutes that we have left. You heard, look, we talk about headlines, but I want you to go beyond the headlines. When you have President Trump saying that we have these submarines and we're moving them and we're mobilizing, people hear that and they right away think, uh-oh, are we getting close to some kind of a conflict?
So I would say, first of all, I wouldn't put a lot of stock in what Donald Trump said on his social media platform. This idea that somehow our nuclear capable Trident missiles are not already positioned where they could do what they need to do in the event of some conflict, I think is an absurd proposition. So this idea that somehow through a social media post, Donald Trump is repositioning American nuclear forces in an effort to be ready when something happens. I just think that that's not the case. I think it's a lot of talk.
But he's blasting back about other talk that came from the former Russian president, who was pretty blustery in the things that he said.
So that's right. But Medvedev doesn't have any power.
And that's the former president.
That's the former president. Yeah. He gets trotted out onto the stage to say provocative things, to say things like this that fuel this larger sort of Russian narrative that they're still a superpower, that they're still a country that the world has to contend with, and they are, right? But Medvedev has no more power to order Russian forces to launch a nuclear strike than I do. And so if Medvedev is saying, the United States needs to remember that we still have nuclear strike capability, that would be like me saying to Donald Trump, hey, remember the Russians still have nukes.
20 seconds left. How afraid is Putin of severe sanctions coming his way to his country?
Sanctions could do a lot of damage. Now, what they did say publicly the other day is that Russia has a long history of being able to manage under sanctions, and so they're not concerned. But I think they should be.
Dr. Peter Trumbore, Oakland University Political Science Chair. It's always good to see you. Thanks for joining us on The Pulse.
Thank you.
Appreciate your perspective. Still ahead, former VP Kamala Harris was asked who she thinks is the future of the Democratic Party, what she didn't say that's turning heads, leading us to ask, who is the future for both the Dems and the Republicans? We're hearing from both sides of the aisle. You're watching The Pulse here on Fox 2. Welcome back to The Pulse. We've seen the face of politics change over the last several decades, of course. Many wonder, what do the futures of the GOP and Democratic parties look like moving forward? Democratic State Rep Noah Arbit and conservative columnist Brandon Bryce joining us via Zoom from Washington. And we thank you both for joining us here on The Pulse. Good to see you.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for having me.
I want to begin by having you listen to something that just happened this week with former VP Kamala Harris on one of the late night shows, talking about the question that we're posing here on The Pulse. Take a listen.
Who's leading the Democratic Party? I'm just curious.
There are lots of leaders. And
there's generally a leader of the Democratic Party. You know, like, oh, that's the leader of the Democratic Party. And who comes to mind?
I think there are a lot of, I'm not going to go through names because then I'm going to leave somebody out and then I'm going to hear about it. But let me say this. I think it is a mistake for us who want to figure out how to get out and through this and get out of it, to put it on the shoulders of any one person. It's really on all of our shoulders.
You know, that answer actually left Colbert exasperated because he was like, you still didn't answer the question. Who are some of the names, or who is a name that we can talk about? I'll begin with our Democrat who's in the group here, who's also a political observer, Representative Noah Arbit. Was that a good enough answer for the American people?
Yeah, I mean, I think she's right. I mean, the reality is that the Democratic Party is in opposition right now. We are the minority party in Congress. We hold no branches of government. It's our responsibility right now to hold the Trump administration accountable for its lawlessness, its misdeeds, its mishandling of the economy. And that's exactly, I think, what you're seeing. You know, the reality is we don't have a president, right? So we don't have one leader. She's right.
But when the shoe was on the other foot, Republicans had people.
Yeah, because they're a cult.
Democrats, many of them, look, you're talking to people out there.
You mean to tell me that in 2012, when Obama was president, that the Republicans had a party from 2009 to 2012?
Well, there were certainly candidates out there, and I think
and there are candidates out there.
Who are those candidates? Who are the faces?
I mean, I think it's anyone that people can think of. Pete Buttigieg comes to mind. You know, some might even say our governor. You know, the governors across the country are
Governor Newsom.
Sure. Yeah. People who are Democrats who are stepping up to lead and fight back and, you know, stand up, speak out and fight back against this administration. That's what we're seeing from the Democrats.
Do you think it's important to have faces and names, not just to print in the paper or to talk about on late night talk shows, but to do the work? Don't you think that's important?
And I think they are. And that's why I think that this sort of, you know, conversation over who is the leader of the Democratic Party is sort of silly. It misses the point.
Brandon Bryce, I want to begin with you and talk about the Democrats for a moment. When you hear former VP Harris talk a little bit about that, that answer for many isn't satisfactory. What do you think?
I mean, I think that was saying a whole lot to say nothing. She said absolutely nothing. And this has been the problem with her even candidacy, is it was a bunch of of words. She said absolutely nothing. The question was very clear. She didn't answer it. I can tell you who some of the leaders of the Democratic Party are, starting with, I mean, if you want to talk about on the Democrat side, a candidate that has shown she can work across the aisle, whether you like her or not, it's Michigan's governor. But let me also respond to my colleague. When you say a cult, well, everyone must be a cult, because last time I checked, Kamala Harris. And so I think, again, this is the type of name calling. When you don't have content, you know what they do? They resort to name calling. The question was simple, Roop. She didn't answer it. And this is why she lost her election, because she couldn't answer a simple question. This is the vice president of the United States. She's got more intel than anybody. And you can't answer who's leading the Republican Party? I can name it.
Well,
you got two people.
Brandon, Representative
got,
Arbit, I do want to ask you about that because you talk about the cult. I've actually heard Republicans say that the Democratic Party is a cult. If you look at how Kamala Harris was, how President Joe Biden waited it out and then finally was told it's time for you to retire, and then bringing Kamala Harris in, it didn't give voters a hell of a lot of opportunity to look for other leaders in the party, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, I would agree.
I would never call anybody a cult.
Okay.
But I will say the Democratic Party knew that this president had issues health-wise, and they did nothing. And as you can see, it came out that there was a problem. And so maybe not a cult, but the party of mistruths, definitely a possibility.
So let's talk for a moment about what it is that both these parties, you think, as a political observer and someone who's a politician himself, Representative Arbit, what do these folks need to do in order to start getting into people's consciousness and so that they understand, hey, these are the people who I could perhaps vote for, not only in the midterms, but in the presidential election?
Yeah, I agree. And I think that, it's incumbent upon Democrats, who are the next generation of leaders who want to lead, the party, want to lead the country, to get out there and make the case. And, I think one of the things that, I've been critical of the Democratic Party about is being weak and not really standing for anything. We've been running against this man for 10 years and haven't learned a damn thing from him. And the fact is that he is a master at commanding media. He's a master at while Democrats are busy, fact-checking every little thing, he lies, and they lie with abandon. And so for me, it's really important that, the Democrats come out swinging against this administration. That's why, I'm always here. That's why I'm always, speaking out, standing up and fighting back against this administration with clarity and with truth.
And perhaps Colbert is talking about, if you've got to come out swinging, you got to come out swinging with people that people can identify with. And that's kind of the point. I do want to give you the last word here, Brandon. Look at the MAGA party, because it's not just Republicans, it's Donald Trump's party, the president's party. When you look at President Trump's party, who's next in line to take over should this president leave?
Well, first of all, it's not Donald Trump's party, it's the Republican Party. But I think it's an interesting question, because here's the reality. No one is like Trump. And I think, Trump is the guy who, he's been on your TV for 40 years. He says what he believes is accurate, and he has no fear when it comes to standing up against politicians. You and I, Roop, both know that's not how Washington works. And so I would question, who is the next type of leader that's bold enough to stand up for what they believe in? That's unfortunately not what you find in Washington, whether you're a Democrat or Republican.
We're going to keep having this conversation, hopefully with you two as well, if you'll join us again. Brandon, Bryce, good to see you. Thanks for your perspective. Representative Arbit, always good to have you as well. Sure. Thank you. Still ahead, he's here to bring laughs to Detroit this weekend, and he's taking a break from the stage to join us in Studio C. Comedian Will Burkart is in next to talk about whether politics belong in stand-up. You're watching The Pulse on Fox 2. It is people, power, and politics. This, my friends, is The Pulse. Welcome back. Glad you're with us on this night. We're doing something a little bit different. We did this before with another comedian not long ago, and we're here with a very well-known comedian across the country. We're talking about Will Burkart. He's been doing comedy for about a decade now, and he's performing in Royal Oak, has another show on Saturday night. And while he's in Detroit, he decided to stop by The Pulse, and we want to say thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me. Pleasure to be here. I love it here.
Well, I'm glad. And it's funny because you're from the Midwest, but you really like warm weather.
I do.
So you're back only during the summer, like a one-time only thing. Like you're in Royal Oak.
Yes.
You're hanging out there. What is it about coming back to the Midwest that makes you feel anything at all at home? Now, you were a very young kid when you grew up here. But
yeah, because I was born in Peoria, Illinois. Shout out. Everyone here.
There was like 6 people who just said, yeah.
It's a lot of cheer. We're mic'd up so you can't hear them. But
that's right.
And I'm a West Coast guy. Grew up near San Francisco. But then for film school in college, I went to Chicago. And I learned to really love the Midwest and just the charm of it and just the energy. I just loved the Midwest. But it was just too cold to exist as a human. Like, I don't like the idea that you can't go outside for like 9 months. That's crazy. And so I moved back to LA. But every time I am lucky enough to do shows in the Midwest, especially a place like, honestly, where I'm staying in Royal Oak is fantastic. And there's just something about it that I really like. I like the people, I like the vibe, and it's just nice.
I got to ask you, it's interesting because I follow your work and we watch you, on the socials and on YouTube. I find it interesting because your act doesn't change. If you're in LA, I'm sure you kind of go local a little bit, but when you're in Detroit here, you're kind of doing Will.
Yeah.
Do you have to change what you're talking about depending on where you're at?
That's a great question. Funny enough, even in LA, I'm working on jokes thinking about how they're going to do in Royal Oak. So I very much want my jokes to translate no matter where I am, and no matter how old you are, whether you're 18 or you're 70, I want you to still laugh at the same jokes. I think comedians sometimes they do a lot of niche jokes where they try to oh, the people who are 28 are gonna love this, but I'd rather everyone in the room be like, oh, I've been there. Everyone.
Sure.
I think that creates, I want all of us to have this moment together. We are all on the same page. And I think that's very undervalued in comedy. I just think it's really fun to be not only relating to what the guy with the microphone is saying, but everyone in the room is like, oh my God, I have been there. I think that's so fun.
And you do that with the audience, and that's one of your trademarks, is to look at someone in the audience and not make fun of them, but rather ask them questions, get to know them, and then find the irony in a moment, right?
Absolutely.
That's kind of what you do.
And they call it crowd work, and everyone does crowd work, and people think they'll be like, oh, I can't wait to come to your show. You got to roast me. I'm like, not going to happen. I'm not going to roast you.
Not here to make fun of you.
Because you also came here, got a babysitter. I'm going to make fun of your shirt?
Sure.
No way.
No, right.
It's really just a conversation, and I find a stand-up show is most fun if it's both. If it's a mixture of, I'm going to do some jokes, talk to you guys for a little while. Going to do some more jokes, talk to you guys. It just creates a more fun experience instead of just listening to a guy talk for an hour. It's you kind of get used to the rhythm. I kind of like waking people up. When I'm like, hey, what's up with you? What are you doing over here? What are you guys drinking over there?
They're not
people
a passive
are
audience. Yeah, you're talking to me.
They got to be on.
They got to be on. And when you go into a show, you got to know that crowd work may happen around you. If you're wearing a funny shirt, that you got a babysitter.
If you're not going to wear sleeves in the front row,
I want to talk about it.
I'm going to say something.
Well, I got to ask you, the one thing you won't say something about is politics. And this show is all about politics. And
Perfect.
And the last time I had, Joe Gatto on, he was on.
Oh, sure.
And he also tries to avoid that kind of that whole brand. And yet late night shows that are on at the same time as this show are talking about politics the whole time. You avoid that on purpose. Talk about that.
Yeah, I mean, it's look, if I had a funny, silly take on politics, maybe I would mention it. But to me, my brand of stand-up and what I like to make people feel, like we talked about, of everyone being on the same page, relatable. I just don't want to bring politics into it just because it can be so heavy, especially now things feel so heavy and tough. It's I want you to have a break from that. I want you to just have a breather and let's just be silly. I'll do some poop jokes, something silly, just to lighten the mood because things are so heavy and people have such heavy lives sometimes. I just like stand-up to just be a break.
So you've had a decade of comedy under your belt.
Yeah.
And in that decade, you've seen the world and the country change.
Yeah.
And the divide become worse in some ways.
Sure.
And so your job is not to perpetuate more of that darkness, that heaviness, but instead to bring people together.
Exactly, and just lighten the mood and just make people forget about how heavy things can be lately.
You saw Detroit-style pizza in the newsroom. It looked pretty good.
It looked really good.
Have some later. Yeah.
I will absolutely have some later, and I appreciate you giving me pizza.
Listen, we got to feed our guests when they come here, especially when they're from the West Coast. The West Coast, y'all are good at a lot of things. Pizza's not one of them. I've had the pizza out there. I'm just saying, Detroit style is where it's at.
I'm offended, but we're not going to talk about it.
We're not going to talk. We'll need a whole new segment.
Yeah, well, I'll be back.
Will Burkart, you're performing in Royal Oak this weekend on Saturday night. One more show in town. And we hope you'll go out and check him out. You can also check him out on his YouTube channel as well.
Yeah, I put out my first stand-up special on my YouTube, so please go watch that.
Checked it out. Very good. Will, thanks for your time here.
Thanks for having me.
And that does it for the Pulse on this night. As always, we thank you so much for joining us. If you have a question or a comment, perhaps you have a fact check you'd like to see, just hit us up, hit that QR code on your screen, and let us know what you want to see. I'm Roop Raj. As always, it was great to be with you.
Yo.